Hello everyone. I'll try talking and just make sure that everyone can hear me okay. Sounds good. Okay, lovely. All right.
Julie, can I ask, we also had a bit of a problem with the time. So we were ready to link in with John Hunter at our time, 12:30, I think it was. So John Hunter hasn't been able to come back, I don't think, to link in, but they were asking whether the questions and answers portion of this webinar would also be recorded. Is that going to be available on the website?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
So that the whole session will be recorded. So yes, not a problem at all.
Excellent. Okay.
All right, and thanks for that feedback. I think what I'll do I'll send another MailChimp thing out and just let people know that, to base it off Queensland time. And again, my sincere apologies for that. Okay, so without further ado, I will whip through this first bit. I'm hoping that most people have had an opportunity to look at the framework. I don't want to go through that in any great detail. The main reasons for changing, we heard very clearly back in 2012 that we hadn't got it right in terms of paediatrics, that we did need a thickness level thinner than mildly thick, and the new IDDSI framework deals with that and includes that, which is great. Our current Australian standards, as you know, are actually 11 years old now. And we've also got some testing methods that help us to improve our ability to communicate with each other. So those testing methods then, so whether it's how thick is thick, how soft is soft, how small is small, we've got simple but effective measures that can be done at the time of testing. While you can do them every time, we actually don't want you to do them every time because we know that that would be way too onerous. They're most useful for initial staff training, for auditing, certainly for industry to use and develop test products, and for kitchens when you're developing and testing recipes. So the main things that change as we map across, we have talked about or in previous webinars, I've spoken about the colour changes. And the main reason for that is so that we can be red, green, colour blind friendly. Every place in the world has had to change, but you can see here with the new IDDSI methods that we've quite clearly separated the red and the green colour, which is different to the way it was for the Australian standards before. We've got our new thickness level, and we're going with a simple numbering system because that was what made sense around the globe in all cultures. From a food point of view, our labels again stay pretty much the same. We have numbers instead of letters, again, because culturally that is what translates best. We've got this new level of liquidized, which had in fact been in use but just hadn't been labelled. And then we've got this textured description of transitional solids. I know I had an email during the week from a paediatric clinician who wanted to know what had happened to dissolvable solids. And I just wanted to assure you that we didn't lose it. There are a few of us around the board table that fought long and hard to make sure that it was still there. And we recognise that it spans, in fact, a few different texture categories at clinician discretion. In terms of when you change from the paediatric to the adult particle sizes, so the particle sizes are based on autopsy data. We recognise, though, that there is a huge amount of variability in human beings. Your average 4-year-old, you could line 10 of them up and they'll all have slightly different tracheal sizes. The same with if you line 20 adults up, males and females, for example. So they are based on the best available information we have at the time. A lot of it's come from tracheostomy information as well. So the idea of when you change from paediatric to adult particle sizes is when they are physically big enough. So similar to that concept of like weight in changing the child's car seat orientation, it's not down to chronological age because we recognise that can be really variable. It really comes down to their stature. We were asked to pinpoint a chronological age, so we can say puberty, but again, we know that that's got a really wide window on it. So for girls, that's 10 to 14 years. For boys, it's 12 to 16 years. Probably what makes more practical sense is to speak with your doctor about whether or not the child has sufficient tracheal growth to minimise their choking risk, so that if you know what the two different particle sizes are, then you can speak with your doctors and go that way. So in terms of for level 5 minced and moist, what changes for our Australian paediatric patients? So our current particle size recommendations for texture being minced and moist is 0.2 to 0.5 centimetres. So 2 mil to 5 mil was the recommended particle size there. And that's down the bottom here. And we had said down there particle size for children over 5 years of age and adults. So again, you know, you can see that there's stature variability going to be there. We had initially in our very first lot of the framework included this 2 to, I think it was 2 to 4 millimetres is what we had there, but we're again pushed quite hard by the North American group. They wanted just a single diameter there. So what we came down with was a 2 millimetre lump size. We said lump size because we recognise that they're not all nice and neat and even. And because this texture is designed to mimic essentially a reasonably chewed bolus, on our audit tool you will notice that it says 2 mil by 2 mil by no larger than 8 mil. So that allows you then to include things like rice, for example, without pulverising it and completely destroying it. We recognise clinically that there's some benefit to having that variation there to encourage chewing to occur. Just in terms of presentation, so this is what 4 mil looks like, the adult lump size, and this is what 2 mil looks like. And one of the things that we're going to make sure that we do this time around as well, whilst those sorts of images can be useful to help people understand what the size looks like, that's not what we're aiming to have for presentation purposes. We don't want the 3 scoops there. We have better images that we can use for presentation purposes, and that's just an example there, so food moulding. So this is the question and answer. So for level 5 minced and moist, why does the IDDSI framework say 2 mil lump size and the audit sheet say equal to or less than 2 mil and no longer than 8 mil? And that is, as I've explained there, so that you can include something like rice or risotto pasta, for example. It was going to be too difficult to describe the particle size otherwise. I wanted to let you know that we've had some very generous people. So the Children's Hospital of Orange County did their implementation in Los Angeles last year. They went through a 9-month transition process, and as part of that they developed a couple of recipe books. They're quite simple recipes, but they very kindly shared those, and they are available on the IDDSI website. So there's a level 5 minced and moist recipe book and also one for level 6 soft and bite-sized, and that's just one of the examples there. And some other different examples there as well. We recognise that people, I think, are really crying out for recipes, and we're doing our best to see how we can help there. In terms of level 6, soft and bite-sized, the changes here, so apart from changing from texture A soft, currently it says targeted particle size for infants and children should be less than half that for adults, so less than half of the 1.5, or equal to 0.08 or the 8 millimetres. So this actually doesn't really change. This is the same as what texture A currently is. I know that over the years there has been some changes to the framework, it would appear the Australian framework, so that food is being presented in whole pieces rather than the chopped pieces. So that's just to clarify that there. And this is just the information that goes with it, which again I'm sure you're quite familiar with. So the idea behind this is that we know that chewing is necessary. There's your 8 mil by 8 mil for children. We need tongue strength and control to move the food for chewing and swallowing. You should be able to easily cut it with just the side of the fork, but in addition to that, when you press into it with sufficient pressure that your thumbnail will blanch to white, the food should completely squash out and not return to its original shape. So we don't want to just put indentation marks in it, we really want to completely destroy it. And that's where bread falls down, unfortunately, because you really just leave indentation marks in the bread, you can't fork mash it. Level 7 you'd be familiar with. Some people may not yet be familiar with our most recent eBite, and that is that we have heard very clearly that we do need a way of categorising those soft foods that don't have a particle size restriction. So these might be for people who would ordinarily choose soft textures, or for people who have no increased risk of choking and no mealtime behaviours that increase their risk. That's the idea behind them. So we put that out to the world. We had over more than 30 countries participate and more than 2,000 responses. We've kept it in level 7 because that's the only level that does not have particle size restrictions. But it will have information in there in the same way that the level 6 does with what's included, what's not included. And the key being that there's no increased risk of choking outside of normal. We recognise that children, by the very nature of the fact that they're learning to eat, will have some increased risk, and we recognise that there, will be an adult, should be an adult present with them for supervision. So, but this is an increased risk, if you like. Just wanted to draw your attention to some of the resources that we've got on the IDDSI website. So we've got these business card sized templates. The graphic art's already been done so that when they get printed out, you can actually use these as little rulers. So they could be quite useful for, whether it's having on the wards or having in the kitchen if you want a really quick ready reckoner to see whether your particle sizes are correct. And then also those instructions for the flow test. The spoon tilt test, just very briefly, is designed to cope with stickiness. Again, looking at the autopsy data that we have, we know that a lot of sticky foods are a choking risk. So, and to clarify, we know that food is not going to completely cleanly come off. Something like a panna cotta will, but something like a Greek yogurt, which is shown in the top part of the slide there, will hold its shape on the spoon, and then as you tip it over, will start to fall off, and if you give it just a flick of the wrist, it will completely come off. You should still be able to see the spoon through any residue that's left. And that's different to the nut butter that's down the bottom there that you can see really is quite sticky. We are in the process of developing some videos which we hope that people might find useful as well. So this is just an example. So that's something that is fine, that comes off quite nicely. You didn't even need to flick your wrist for that one. This is another one that just under its own weight is going to come off quite easily. And this one, you can see that we're really tacking away on that to try and get it to come off the spoon, and there's little bits of residue that are left there. So we're hoping that people will find those sorts of videos helpful. So do we still have those meltables or dissolvable solids? And the answer is yes. They are called transitional solids, and they can be used at levels 5, 6 and 7 at your discretion. The reason why we call them transitional solids is because they change. They start as a solid and they change into something else when you add moisture. So, and that could be saliva or water, or even a change in temperature. So we know that there's minimal chewing needed. We know that tongue pressure should be enough to break it down after the food becomes moist or after it changes temperature. So things like your wafers, potato crisps, and even ice. What if our patients are already eating bread and sandwiches? So if they've clinically been assessed as safe on bread and sandwiches, then please continue to include them. I do need to let you know the Australian guidelines always had them coded for inclusion after clinical assessment. They were actually never recognised as being a regular inclusion for texture A soft. But again, over the years, it's possible that that has changed. There is also the IDDSI Minced and Moist sandwich video that you may find helpful, where we use breadcrumbs, so fresh bread that's where you put it into a food processor to blitz it down into breadcrumbs. You can put that in a mould, spray it with some milk or water or stock just to lightly moisten it, then put an appropriate filling over the top. Layer it with more breadcrumbs, again lightly moisten that and put it in the refrigerator and bring it back out. Now you can eat that with a fork or a spoon. It actually still tastes like a sandwich. You can still taste the bread. It still feels like bread in your mouth as well, but without the choking risk there. In terms of mapping over to liquids, we've actually already talked about those changes there. One of the questions I've asked is, what do we do with the thick fluid recipes we're currently using? Now, if they are working for you, you don't need to change them. Please just test them using the flow test and categorise them. You might be finding that you're starting to see that those liquids change with temperature. And what I need to let you know is that they've actually always changed with temperature. It's just that you have a tool now that's sensitive enough to show that change. It's a reminder about the flow test, just making sure that you've got the right syringe there. So it needs to measure 61.5 millimetres from the 0 to the 10 millilitre line there. The reason being that otherwise the dimensions change and you won't be able to marry it up with the IDDSI recommendations there for fluid thickness. It's how slightly thick. Just one other thing here with liquidized or moderately thick, what the steps for that are. So the first thing you do if you think it could be a moderately thick is put it through the flow test. And if you've got 10 mils still remaining or 1 to 2 drips, then you move across to the fork test after that and you look at its behaviour. So does it drip slowly in dollops or strands through the slots of a fork? That is, could you not eat it with a fork because it's dripping through? And if that's the case, it's moderately thick or liquidized. If you can eat it with a fork, if it's sitting on top, mounting on the top and just has a tiny little tail perhaps that comes through the bottom, then it's a level 4. But we recognise that you couldn't just automatically assume it's level 4 because we have got some things that are thick, but they will float off the side of a spoon or a fork. The other thing that I'm being asked a lot about are the labelling transitions. So we are in the prepare and educate stage at the moment. And I know that from May, possibly even a little earlier, we have got various industry who are planning on changing their packaging over. If you've got any questions or concerns about that at any stage, please do email me. This is some specific information from the manufacturers there. So we know that with other legislated label changes, quite often, so that the allergens or country of origin, it quite often takes a couple of years for that to happen. Now, our industry have been on board from our aware phase, and so that's why I say it should still be fine for the 1st of May 2019 because they've actually already had the information for a couple of years. So many manufacturers have indicated they're changing their labels to be ready for the 1st of May 2019. Those label changes are voluntary in the same way that packaging accessibility changes to meet arthritis guidelines are voluntary as well. From a safety perspective, the steering committee, so our professional associations, are strongly advocating for those changes for patient safety. Manufacturers and industry would like you to contact them directly for information on when their product labels will be changing. All right, I'm actually going to stop there and turn it over for some discussion because I think I'd prefer to go through some of the resources and the website afterwards. I'd like to see if we've got some discussion based on that information that I've got there so far. So I'll turn it over to you. Please feel free to either unmute yourself or to write in the chat box. Either is fine.
Julie, it's Gloria here from Westmead. Just going back to what you were talking about, the determination of the particle size, and you've advised that we contact the patient's doctor, regarding that tracheal size for that particular patient. Are you thinking a paediatrician or a referral is needed to an ear, nose and throat specialist? Is there an exam that they need to have to determine that with some objectivity?
Look, in the same way that I think what you're after, I think a paediatrician would be fine. Someone, obviously, a doctor who has special knowledge of children is obviously more, is obviously the ideal. In rural and remote areas, it may be a GP. But if you can let them know, what I would be suggesting is you let them know we can either do particle sizes of this or this. We feel that the child is probably safe to move up. Are you comfortable that if there was a choking incident, that you would also support that or not? Does that make sense?
Look, the theory makes sense. I'm just not comfortable that paediatricians would have that sort of level of knowledge. And I guess when you're talking about that range, 2 millimetres to, is it 5 millimetres?
4 millimetres.
4 millimetres. I'm just not sure whether a paediatrician or a GP would be able to confidently say.
So I guess when you're thinking about tracheostomy sizing and that sort of thing, the other, as a proxy, I know that we've got an article that we refer to where they use the diameter of the child's little finger as a proxy measure, and there's some evidence around that as an indicator of roughly what diameter their trachea might be. Aside from that, I could certainly be in touch with the medical association and see whether I can get some further guidance on that. Would that be helpful?
Absolutely, because I think for us, operationalizing. Oh, am I on mute? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Because for New South Wales, from an operational side of things, where there's a state menu. I think you're aware that there's a state menu for New South Wales Health currently, and that's been running for a long time. What's been happening for paediatric patients is that there isn't the equipment to be able to measure, to the sizes that are required and have been recommended in the past for paediatrics under 5. So the problem for those patients is that they default to a puree diet. So there's no real transitional diet for those patients.
Right. So even under the current standards, you're really at under 5 years, you're looking at purees. Is that right?
Yeah, from an operational side of things, yeah.
Okay.
Or at the very least, there's a lack of variety in products that we're able to put onto the state menu.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. And I am aware that New South Wales Health Share is quite a very unique model. So that's great, actually. Yeah. Okay. I will definitely follow up with that in mind and be in touch with the AMA or the most relevant body for paediatrics there and explain the situation to them.
Yep. Thank you, Julie.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Okay, so the paediatrics, we're talking more about stature, really, and this is the hard thing. The hard thing is we're trying to make a machine, if you like. The hospitals that are trying to prepare meals for thousands of children do something quite specific that is limiting the kids' choice, unfortunately, when we have to try and do this. But these are important things. Other questions about the food or the liquids?
Good. Yep, good. Hi, Julie. It's Aoife from LTCH. How are you?
Good, thanks, Aoife.
Sorry, my page has gone off at the same
You're
time.
Right.
We just have a couple of questions here, if that's okay. So one was, I know you and I have sort of been talking a little bit around some of the companies, and have you heard anything more about whether any of them were willing to take on the paediatric minced and moist?
So there was that's a great question, Aoife, actually. So there was a company that contacted me about about making texture modified food for typically developing infants, and I contacted them to ask them whether they would be interested in making it for this population, and their indication was yes, if they could talk to someone. So are there, perhaps after the webinar, if there are specific people that I could put them in touch with, they are very keen to explore that option and create food that is correctly sized for you.
Okay, I didn't get a chance to contact them directly. I just kind of Googled them and looked them up. They didn't look like they're a very large company or anything. Would that be true?
So I'll put it this way: they plan on supplying to a one of the 3 big supermarkets in Australia.
Okay, great. And the other question we had, just looking at one of your slides there, was around the presentation molds that you had in mind. From a nutritional perspective, I guess we'll be very concerned about serve sizes and making sure the serve sizes meet up with what it needs to be for the different age groups.
Mm-hmm.
How does that marry up with presentation and what your idea is for presentation in terms of your molds and that?
It's another great question, Aoife. I guess so. What all those were at that particular time were cookie cutters that I had access to. But you're exactly right. It obviously needs to be of the correct volume for nutritional needs. So. Looking, I guess, to see, I guess it's more looking at out of the box stuff. So whether it's piping, whether it's moulding, different ways of presenting it, and you may already be doing that. It was just and this has kind of come up from the Royal Commission into aged care, was the poster, the Australian poster that had the different textures on it, but chefs had decided that that's the way the food was supposed to be presented, which it's not particularly appealing when it's presented in that way. So it was, I guess, a reminder that if you can present it in a more appealing fashion, and yes, making sure that it is that there is sufficient nutrition there for it, obviously as well.
Are any of the other sites, such as like Orange County or any of those, using moulds? I know I've seen the sandwich kind of version, but are there commercially available moulds?
There are some commercially available moulds, certainly for, I am familiar with a company that's doing them. I think they're doing them for adults. I will follow that up actually, thanks Aoife, and just see whether they've got something in terms of the quantities that they're producing that would also be suitable. So for paediatrics, if I can flip that around again, are moulds usually used in paediatrics or no?
We don't use them at our site, and we're hard pressed at the moment to get the right serve size for the right ages. So we're pretty, it would be an extra dimension, I guess. I would agree that it needs to look good, definitely. Mm-hmm. That's why I was just wondering if there's anything that's already being used out there. And then we've got Queensland Health guidelines in terms of serve sizes for different age groups too. So we need to be mindful of that. And this the same with our adult population too. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of have a range for different food groups, as it needs, it needs to be between this size and that size. And then I guess the mould just kind of needs to not just look good, but also deliver that volume. So
for sure. I'll follow up.
We'd be happy to file some as well at our site if they were available, to have a look at, because we just have had a student project looking at that, but we were more looking at the textures at this point in time based on current foods and that what we could do to get there. But we look at presentation yet, which we'll obviously have to.
Okay, now that sounds good. Well, certainly I know that the moulds that they've got that they're making available are commonly used in aged care facilities, where at the other end of life for you, nutrient density is similarly pretty important as well. So, but again, just looking into the science of it to make sure that that is the case. I'm happy to look into that further and put that information out there for you.
That'd be great, thank you.
Julie, it's just Madeline from LCCH as well. I've just got a question in regards to the slightly thicken, as to whether, as part of this, you're approaching any of the formula companies who already make like the anti-regurgitation formula to try and standardise some of that, because there can be quite wide variation. Obviously, some families aren't using it for a dysphagia purpose; they're using it more for a reflux purpose. But even within that, there's variation between some that are thin to almost moderately thick. And is part of your role within this looking at that, or is that not so much?
Look, it hasn't been. I guess that's the beauty of these webinars, where we're seeking information on what it is you need, and I think that's quite a reasonable ask to be in touch with the formula companies, to ask them A, to make sure that they are aware, and then B, to see what flexibility they have to provide that option there as well. So I'm happy to take.
Even if they had, if they weren't going to change anything, even if they could change their labelling so it had a disclaimer, please note this is not, compliant with blah or something like that, just because, they are so variable. Yep.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, when you start doing some flow testing with them.
I think I sent you our sort of stuff that we've done a little bit of over the last 2 years. So
cans
of worms.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
I've got a question to Julie. It's Sheridan Collins. I'm a dietitian at the Children's Hospital at Westmead. We've recently had a student testing our foods according to the IDDSI guidelines, and we've and one of my concerns was with our purees. So our pureed foods tended to not to be able to hold their shape on the spoon generally, and so we figured they were too runny, and I just wondered whether using thickener was something that needs to be done to actually get that to get the puree to hold its shape on the spoon, or is that something that is an issue?
So yes, that's one of the ways that you can do it is adding some variety of thickening agent. I mean, it may even be something, if it's a food-based item like a starch, like potato, for example, to provide that extra stability to it, or looking at the water content of it so that when it's being pureed, perhaps it needs slightly less liquid in it. And the balance then is making sure that it doesn't, while it holds its shape, that it's not too sticky. So, whether you then are also looking at things like whether it's, I'm going to say, oils or emulsifying agents that will make it slightly slippery. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. I think it's a sort of a more extended understanding that we're getting on what we actually need to have.
Yep.
More complex to get with the foods just as they are, but I'm gathering that's what the patients need.
Yeah, and so with the textures that you're currently using, then would you say that they are more like a thick soup, more like a sort of a liquidized consistency?
Well, I think they actually vary a lot. So some would be very runny, like a pureed peach that might have canned peaches that might have a lot of fluid in it.
Yep.
Where say the pureed potato is probably quite thick, and would meet the specifications.
So I guess with that as well, then working hand in hand with your speech pathologist to look at, well, is the child currently managing that level of variability? So, does that give you clinical opportunities to actually give them a more normalised texture rather than a thinner texture as well, or vice versa, a thinner rather than a thicker texture. We had similar comments come from a kitchen in Toronto, actually, where they had routinely, so their standard practice was an adult kitchen, was to add thickener to all of their soups, for example. And then when they tested them, they recognised that they actually, they didn't need to add any thickening agent to the potato soup, for example, because, of course, of the natural starches within there. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose, leading on from that too is that need for recipes that will work in a kitchen, in a hospital kitchen situation, where there might be different cooks preparing meals on different days, and we have to be very exact about the recipes.
Yes, yep, you're exactly right there. We have, IDDSI itself has steered clear of producing recipes to this point because we know that it's intended to be for all cultures, so trying to get that is challenging. But we've got lots of generous people who are, as I say, coming forward, people like the people at Orange County. We had a webinar last week from a couple of chefs from Oak's Kitchen in the UK, where they went through the types of, how you decide on which meats are going to be suitable for these diets, for example, and also some information around pureeing rice, for example, and whether it's short grain rice or long grain rice, and coming down into the reason why one works better than another. For example, when they were talking about the meat, they were talking about, if you think about the animal, and the muscles that work the most are going to be the most tender. So for chicken, it's the thigh fillet, for example. And they included in their webinar, there were some recipes there, and they showed the different testing methods. So if you have an opportunity at some stage to hop onto the website, it's certainly worth a look as well.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure. I know our Perth hospital, sorry, someone else might be asking a question first, sorry, but then after that, if I could encourage Perth, if you've got any questions, please sing out. I know you've got another meeting to get to.
I was just, Tiana from Newcastle, John Hunter Children's Hospital. I was just wanting to ask, and I don't know whether this was sort of alluded to in Aoife's questions about some of the more, I guess, commercially, or the food available for typically developing infants. I guess my question relates to commercially available food, so your Heinz, your Bellamy's, all those kinds of commercially available foods. There's a large variability in the textures that you get in the same age group recommended food. So you can get whole peas and big chunks of carrot in some of them, and others are much more pureed and smaller particle sizes. Is there any talk of bringing this categorization system across to commercially available foods as well to make it easier for families?
There isn't at this point. So the manufacturer that contacted me was saying that he had found it incredibly difficult to find guidance around what the particle sizes were, and he'd noticed exactly what you're talking about, that huge range of variability that exists already for typically developing infants, and that he actually found the IDDSI guidelines very helpful because it gave him something to work from. So his plan was to use that in his recipe structuring. So I would imagine, again, there's nothing outside the realm of, I can certainly be in touch with the companies to make sure that they're aware of what IDDSI actually is. There is, in the UK, for example, what we're starting to hear from the National Health Service is that they're keen for IDDSI to be used to categorise all textures, so that it's not just a dysphagia diet, if you like. It's intended to categorise all food and liquid textures, so that you haven't got one for people without swallowing problems and one for people with. And so what you're talking about would probably align quite nicely with that. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Judy. Thanks very much. I'm sort of just tailbacking on the wonderful Perth Children's Hospital team, but I'm actually at a secondary hospital close by. I've got a bit of an adult hat on as well as a paediatric hat, being head of department of a hospital that services both. And so thank you for the hard work around this. It's amazing, and we're really looking forward to implementing it. The question I have is there any recommendations or something that your working party has done around whose responsibility it is and how we go about ensuring that the community stakeholders or facilities that we might discharge to from the hospital, who's responsible for them to be aware of IDDSI, of ensuring that they understand what this means. And I know one of the girls in the room said, it is us if we're handing over that care, but is there any tools that we have, is there any guidelines around that, around them understanding that there has been a change and this is what it means? And I know when the Australian standards were rolled out, there was a big onus on us doing it. Is that the same case in this instance, and what tools are there available for us?
Certainly. So it's a great question. Thank you. I think a lot of it, as you say, does come back to the clinicians, that as you're providing your handover information to, whether it's to family members or to a community-based clinician, is to communicate that information. We have got patient handouts that are just about ready to go, and we've had those patient handouts checked. So they've been trialled in New Zealand because they transitioned earlier this year, but we've also had them checked by a lady who has a child with a disability and a journalism background for layperson readability. So she's been fantastic in helping us to take the professional language out of it and make sure it makes sense to people. It's got pictures in it as well. So those resources are going to be made available to you. And I can show you on the website where they will be housed, but also, given that I've got information, I think, from most of this group, I can flick those details to you as soon as they're available. So patient handouts, the steering committee is also developing a poster. IDDSI itself, they're waiting on us to complete our poster, which is the large all framework poster, and then we'll be bringing it down into, excuse the pun, bite-sized pieces, so that you've got a paediatric specific, food-based poster, liquids-based poster, to make it easier. One of the comments that I had from a webinar that I linked into last week, I had someone saying, is it possible to have a poster developed to let people know that, and they were talking with their adult hat on, that bread is no longer included on a soft diet, so that could be put in nurses' stations, in emergency departments, for paramedics, those sorts of things. If If there are specific, you know, like just small posters that you think would be useful, please let me know what content would be useful for that. We are also developing just small, you know, short videos that have got just the testing methods on them so that you can pull them down and make those available on the app. So the one thing that is great about the app, if you haven't already got it, it's available on both the iOS and Google Play platforms. It's free to download. And once you've downloaded the app, you don't need further data or Wi-Fi for connectivity. So you've got the framework there. You'll have the videos of the flow testing, for example. Once the abbreviations for computers, you know, are loaded in there. So all of that stuff can be right at your in your pocket, for example. So posters, videos. We're developing a small number of slide kits also for university so that they can be including it in their curriculum. So we're also hoping that students will play an important part as they go to placements to providing that, and potentially also quality assurance projects or various student-led projects may be of benefit there too.
Thank you.
That's all right. Thank you, Amanda. So there's a question here. Amanda's from Liverpool Hospital in Sydney. The mic's not working. So coming on from Yana's question, where do mixed consistencies fit in the IDDSI guide? Absolutely. So level 7 is where they are, unless, again, under clinical assessment, you decide otherwise. The reason for that, and as clinicians, I know you understand this, so when you have a mixed consistency in your mouth, you have to have sufficient oral capacity to hold the solid while you manipulate and swallow the liquid. That's we have evidence to show that that's what people do. So you hold the solid, swallow the liquid, then you'll chew and process the solid and swallow it down. Now, yes, the solids may well be a little bit softer if it's been in a soup or something, but it's still a two-phase, two-step thing. And that's why we've got it classified into level 7, because of the oral skills that you need to manage it.
I've got a question from PCH. I'm aware that this webinar is open to anybody in in the country, and I mean at the moment around the table we've got speech pathologists. I'm not sure who's linked in from the rest of the stage. Now, just wondering what dietitian specific, I guess, networks are happening across the country to make sure that that really critical, I guess, part of the puzzle are as engaged as the speech pathologists. Just because I think it's a little bit of a risk if we've got the speech pathologists all geared up and ready to go, and we're not working alongside our colleagues. Yeah.
Absolutely. We've got the DAA is on the steering committee along with Speech Pathology Australia and the Institute of Hospitality, Healthcare and Catering. We recognise that in addition to our health professionals, it's actually really important to have a link down into the kitchen as well with the people who are preparing the food so that they also understand. On the call, we've actually got, so Aoife, who you heard speaking earlier on, is a dietitian from LCCH here in Queensland. And I think we also had another lady, was it Sheridan? Who also contributed from a dietetic perspective as well. So DAA is certainly sending out, they have weekly newsletters that they're able to send information out in much the same way that Speech Pathology Australia does as well. We recognise, again, at a steering committee level that not everyone is a member of the association, so we're encouraging people, at your workplaces to find your teams, basically, to find your colleagues and talk to them, let them know what you're doing. Even one of the best things that we had, one of our very first pilot sites was in Kempen in Germany, and we had the clinicians, so the nurses, speech pathologists, dietitians come from the hospital ward down into the kitchen and watch what was going on down there. And then they had kitchen staff who followed the trays upstairs into the wards and watched as the meals were served. And the appreciation of the two different groups of what each group was trying to achieve helped really spur the process on. So, there are a couple of ideas on that. Even something as simple as you know, whether it's a quality assurance thing or a lunchtime thing as a just something a little bit different to encourage people to come together. You'd be amazed at or even a wine and cheese evening. You've got your transitional solids there. You've got a whole range of different types of textures. From a, you know, at one point of an after hours function, we had some IDDSI testing with, you know, using flow testing with alcohol, for example, just to try and lighten it, but to start the discussion, to bring people together. So looking at novel ways of doing that.
I just thought I'd add that within Queensland Health, our IDDSI sort of statewide, you know, preparing for IDDSI rollout is it's statewide and is a teleconference meeting with representation from dietetics, food services and speech pathology from sort of each large site. So that's how we've been running, I suppose, our implementation meetings, of having everyone come to the table together. And Aoife had a question.
Oh yeah, my question was just around the regular, because I kind of thought regular would be regular, but I know we've kind of talked about easy chew, so is regular actually easy chew?
No, they're different.
No.
Yeah, so easy chew is a subset, if you like, of regular. Regular means you can have anything.
Okay, so we
yeah.
still have regular, and then within that there's a subset of the easy chew.
Yep.
Which is the soft food without particle size restriction.
That's it.
Okay, so we can still have like crusts on our lasagna and everything. That's good.
Yep.
Thank you.
And another question from Perth, just following up on that, I just want to make sure I've got it right. I know that some sites in the adult world have already taken soft diet out, have taken bread out of soft diet, as there's been a few coronary sort of, you know, a few unfortunate incidences here. And it was interesting when you had mentioned that that was always meant to be the case, that bread wasn't included. I know that there's talk now just amongst our networks where they are saying, oh, we should have soft, until IDDSI rolls out, having dysphagia soft and dental soft. Are you saying that actually this dental soft actually fits under regular?
Possibly. So if you can indulge me for a couple of minutes to talk about teeth and dental and the challenges with that. So the moment you move from having 20 units that will bite together, we know, again, looking at corneal inquiries, that people with inadequate dentition or with dentures don't chew. They produce a very coarse particle size, and that people who have dentures have a higher risk of choking. So where that is particularly important, I guess, is where you've got someone who might have dentures or missing teeth in addition to needing supervision. So they might have dementia, or they might have mealtime behaviours. They might take food from other people. They might mouth stuff. Those sorts of things. That's where you can't just say, right, they've got missing teeth, therefore we can just quietly pop them onto, slightly softer food and they'll be safe, because there are other things to think about. That's the risk associated with calling a diet just something about teeth, if you like. So where the easy to chew falls into the category, it might be someone who even has their own teeth, but who is a frail elderly person, for example, and they have the cognition to know when that piece is a bit big or a bit hard and spit it out. So for anyone who's got the insight to be able to manage the texture, to manage it, that's why it's in level 7. That's why we've put it there. I would say, as a general rule of thumb, if you've got anyone who you feel needs supervision, they probably shouldn't be on level 7. Does that help? Okay. This has been really good. Thank you. I'm got some good things to follow up on. Would you like me? I'll call another time for questions now. But if people are sort of settled for the moment, I can take you through a quick run through the website and just show you where different bits of resources are. Would that be helpful?
Julie, sorry, one more question from us at Westmead.
Sure.
When we've been doing the flow test, we put the thickened fluid into the syringe, And for most thickened fluids, the syringe sort of either empties or doesn't within that 10-second window. We've had some thickened fluids that start off by going through the syringe and then stop, and that's before 10 seconds. So, you know, they start flowing as though they're a thinner consistency, but then completely stop. So what's actually happening there?
So I've had a similar experience with something like buttermilk, for example, where it's possible with some liquids that are slightly complex, and some of your nutritional supplements may fall into this category. You may also find that liquid barium falls into this category as well. That if you start to get some separation, if there are some tiny solids content within the liquid, that can, you know, you might initially get the flow, and then it's almost like the plug hole gets jammed with all the little particles coming together at the nozzle there. So I guess, you know, again, if it's a thickened liquid, it might mean that it hasn't been sufficiently agitated, and so what you've got is a little lump that might have formed in there as well. Also, just as another thing to look at, when you've got your syringe, just check the end of it. Sometimes there can be a little bit of a manufacturing default where you've got a little bit of the plastic that's still over the end, and it just needs to be popped off. So, you know, make sure you have a look at that as well. So I'm hoping that answers the question. Did that help?
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. So I can just see a couple more questions that have popped up here, so I'm reading as well. We often encourage soft food in long stick shapes to encourage self-feeding with finger foods. Okay, can I repeat the explanation as to why the easy to chew but not bite-sized is classified under level 7 and not level 6? Okay, so for level 6, we're looking at people who are not able to reliably take a bite of food that's going to be appropriate for their mouth, basically. Whereas at level 7, the assumption is that they can do that. And that's where I think you'll find that the easy to chew will fit under will give you that option of having soft foods that are cut into stick shapes to encourage self-feeding. So it'll be level 7 regular easy to chew rather than level 7 regular. So that's the rationale there. And then also typically we use starch-based thickeners. Yep, Aptamil cornstarch-based for under 3s. We know these do not hold their consistency and continue to thicken with time. Sorry, so let me start again. We typically use starch-based thickeners for under 3s. We know they don't hold their consistency, continue to thicken with time. Has anyone here or elsewhere tested how long it takes to get the correct thickness and how long it remains with the correct consistency range? I can put that out to the group for questions. I haven't done any specific testing other than the, yep.
We, in the preliminary testing we've done at LCCH, it takes about 5 minutes-ish to get to the correct, like, slightly thick AR consistency, and then it stays that way for about up to 30 minutes. It's a slightly short window, and you can usually thin it back down by heating it, which sounds really counterintuitive. In terms of then it doesn't act in the linear way, much like some of your papers have described, Julie. So if you're doing mildly thick, it doesn't act in the same way. I think it gets to mildly thick in like 2 minutes, and then it's moderately thick within 5. So that's just, yeah, something to be aware of. We've got some stuff, and I can share that with you, Amanda. I've already sent it to Julie and Gloria. So.
Yep, that would be great. Thank you. All right. So what I'm going to do now is come over to the IDDSI website. So hopefully people can see the IDDSI website now. For anyone working with English as a second language, looking at the translations, for example, so you might think that this is a slightly odd thing to be looking at, but we know that a lot of our kitchen staff are, may have English as a second language. So the reason why we have such an unusual range of languages that are translated is that we're lucky enough to have people from around the world who are volunteering their time to do the translations. So these are the ones that are completed. So Chinese, Farsi, French, Canadian, French, Italian, Norwegian, Portuguese from Brazil, Spanish and Swahili. We have a number that are available for for review. So these are ones that have been translated, and we put them up for 3 months for people around the world to comment. And then we've got some that are in progress at the moment. I was chatting with someone this morning who suggested that potentially Sri Lanka and India would be other languages to be looking at as well. And also potentially looking at translating some of the posters into those languages. The resources tab on the IDDSI website is probably the, it's got a lot of information on it. So we have a country-specific information tab here. We're loading up the newsletters. So for anyone who's on the newsletter list, you will have received them. I've got to add the October one up there as well. You can also access actually the other ones as well. So the UK has got a great 10-minute video. They've got comparisons up there. There's some really good resources. So have a look around there. We've got posters that we've already developed, including our colour codes. There's a barium thing for that's for Braco though, for Veribar. We've got adoption posters, we've got conversion charts, the audit sheets you may have seen as well. You can download the little triangles if you want to put them on sticky labels as well, if that helps at all. We've got abbreviations that we've had checked so that they're suitable for computer software, for example, and that they don't cross any of the barriers for the medical abbreviations where there've been known to be issues with that. We've checked against those as well. We've got implementation guides. They're just a suggestion up there, but they might be something to, for you to look at. So we've got some specific for clinicians and healthcare providers, food service and catering and industry, and then a master guide. We've got flow tests, those little flow tests that I showed you there. You'll notice that they are for different countries because it would appear that the business card sizes are different in different parts of the world. Similarly, our food test cards, and then we've got a new reference card as well. We've got a range of PowerPoint presentations that you are more than welcome to download and use. Our publications are open access, so you can get them either on our website or from the Dysphagia Journal, for example. You'll be able to get them there as well. Our e-bites, if you don't currently get the international e-bites, you can always log on here and have a look at them. I don't know that there's much in our newsroom. Oh, we've got a couple of things in there actually. We've got a YouTube channel and our webinar recordings. So on our webinar recordings, so the girls from the Children's Hospital of Orange County did a presentation for us earlier this year. So it's a great little presentation on what they did, how they managed it, and they go through what their what the triumphs and the pitfalls were also. You've got information on the Canadian ones. I've been presenting webinars for the Institute of Hospitality, Healthcare and Catering, and those have been loaded up here as well. There's one further one to come up. This is the one I was telling you about, that's the chefs, so the myths and truths about modifying food for IDDSI levels. So hopefully that might be of help also. And then we've also had, various people. So this is where you find the recipe books from the Children's Hospital of Orange County. We've got here, this was just a recent one, a poster that came through from the San Jose State University introducing the IDDSI flow test into their dietetic curriculum, whether you needed to do practical work or whether you could just provide people with videos. So that information's up there. So the IDDSI framework itself, probably the only other thing to say is to click the top tab as well as these bottom ones, that they provide you with information. If you're looking to see what's happening around the world, we've got the in progress, gives us that information. All right, any other questions or comments? I know that we've had a couple of people have had to leave. Otherwise, as I say, I'm very conscious of your time, very grateful for the input today. I think it's been really helpful.
Thank you, Julie. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.